Imagine standing before a mirror, examining the canvas of your skin. This seemingly simple surface, stretched across your body in varying shades of pigmentation, holds within it one of humanity's most profound evolutionary mysteries. Picture this: a species that originated in Africa with dark skin designed to protect against the harsh equatorial sun. Yet today, that same species displays a remarkable spectrum of skin tones across different geographic regions. You are about to discover the controversial story of how certain populations of humans developed lighter skin, a biological transformation that occurred relatively recently in our evolutionary timeline, yet remains misunderstood by most people. The question seems straightforward: why did some humans become white? But this simple query opens the door to a complex intersection of biology, geography, migration, natural selection, and even cultural interpretation. For centuries, explanations for human skin color differences were entangled with dangerous ideologies about racial superiority. These pseudoscientific claims cast long shadows that still linger today, making any discussion of skin color evolution inherently fraught. Yet beneath these troubled waters lies a fascinating scientific narrative, one about human adaptation, survival, and the remarkable ways our bodies respond to environmental pressures over generations. The story begins approximately 50,000 to 100,000 years ago as anatomically modern humans began migrating out of Africa. These travelers, with their melanin-rich skin, were perfectly adapted for life under the African sun. But as they ventured northward, something unexpected happened. Generation by generation, in certain populations, skin gradually lightened. This wasn't random chance. It was evolution in action, a response to an invisible threat that would shape human appearance for millennia. What could possibly exert enough evolutionary pressure to transform something as fundamental as skin color? And why did this change happen so rapidly in evolutionary terms, becoming fixed in certain populations within just a few thousand years? Tonight, we explore the competing scientific theories behind one of humanity's most visible adaptations, how certain populations developed lighter skin, and why this seemingly simple change reveals profound truths about our relationship with the environment. We'll examine the vitamin D hypothesis, which suggests that lighter skin evolved to capture more sunlight for essential vitamin production in regions with less direct sunlight. But is this explanation sufficient? We'll investigate alternative theories about sexual selection, disease resistance, and dietary adaptations that might have contributed to changes in human pigmentation across different landscapes and climates. We'll consider how recent genetic discoveries have transformed our understanding of skin color evolution, revealing a picture far more complex than previously imagined, with multiple genes controlling pigmentation and independent lightening events occurring in different populations. And most importantly, we'll separate scientific evidence from the harmful myths that have surrounded discussions of human skin color throughout history, clarifying what evolution actually tells us about human variation and what it doesn't. This story takes us across continents and through tens of thousands of years, from the blazing African savanna to the cloudy northern regions of Europe and Asia, following the footsteps of our ancestors as they adapted to new environments. Along the way, you'll learn how the study of human skin pigmentation illuminates broader principles of evolution and natural selection, offering insights into how our species has survived and thrived in dramatically different environments. You'll discover how modern genomic techniques have revealed that skin pigmentation is controlled by a complex network of genes, many of which were only identified in the last decade, fundamentally changing our understanding of when and how skin lightening occurred. The story of human skin color isn't just about pigmentation. It's about vitamin D and folate, ultraviolet radiation and reproductive fitness, migration patterns, and genetic bottlenecks, all interacting in a biological symphony that played out across generations. It's also a story that challenges us to think critically about how we categorize human difference. The gradual nature of skin color variation across geographic regions defies the rigid racial categories that became entrenched in recent centuries. Tonight, we will explore what happened as humans moved across the globe and why the simplistic explanations you may have heard don't fully capture this remarkable evolutionary story. This is not merely a historical account, but a journey into ongoing scientific discovery. Even now, researchers are uncovering new genetic variants and evolutionary pathways that shaped human pigmentation in ways we're only beginning to understand. So join us as we peel back the layers of one of humanity's most visible yet misunderstood adaptations, the evolution of lighter skin, and discover what this remarkable change reveals about our species' past, present, and future. Chapter 2: A Mystery Written in Our Skin. The story of how certain human populations developed lighter skin is far more than a curiosity of evolutionary biology. It touches on fundamental questions about human identity, adaptation, and our relationship with the environment. When we look at a global map of indigenous skin pigmentation, we see a remarkable pattern, a gradient that roughly correlates with latitude. Populations native to equatorial regions typically have darker skin, while those from higher latitudes often have lighter skin. This pattern didn't emerge by chance. It represents one of the clearest examples of natural selection acting on the human body, a physical adaptation that occurred rapidly enough to be visible across a mere 50,000 years of human migration. Understanding this adaptation matters for several profound reasons. First, it offers a powerful counterargument to racist ideologies that have misinterpreted human physical differences as evidence of separate evolutionary paths or inherent biological hierarchies. The scientific reality is far more illuminating. We are one species with remarkable adaptive capabilities, and our surface differences represent environmental adaptations rather than fundamental biological divisions. This understanding has immense social and ethical implications. Second, the study of skin pigmentation evolution provides a fascinating window into how natural selection works. The speed with which certain populations developed lighter skin demonstrates how quickly adaptive traits can spread when survival advantages are significant. Most physical traits change slowly over evolutionary time, requiring hundreds of thousands or millions of years to transform substantially. Yet the lightening of skin in certain populations appears to have happened remarkably quickly. This rapid change suggests powerful selective pressures were at work, forces strong enough to drive significant biological adaptation within just a few thousand years. What could these pressures have been? Third, understanding skin color evolution helps correct a persistent misunderstanding about human variation. We often think of traits as either genetic or environmental, but skin color reveals a more complex truth. While skin color is genetically determined, the specific genes that were selected for in different populations were responding to environmental conditions. This interplay between genes and environment is central to understanding human adaptation. The stakes of this investigation extend beyond academic interest. Misconceptions about skin color have fueled some of history's most destructive ideologies. By understanding the actual mechanisms of skin color evolution, we disarm these dangerous myths. If the predominant theory about vitamin D and skin pigmentation is correct, it means that something as simple as sunlight availability shaped one of our most visible physical characteristics. This reframes how we think about human difference. Consider the implications. What we often perceive as major biological differences between human groups may actually represent relatively minor genetic adaptations to specific environmental conditions, adaptations that occurred quite recently in our evolutionary history. This perspective challenges us to reconsider how we categorize human variation. The gradients of skin color we see across populations don't align with discrete racial categories, but rather demonstrate continuous adaptation across geographic space. Recent genetic studies have further complicated our understanding, revealing that the genes controlling skin pigmentation don't align neatly with continental populations. Some genetic variants for lighter skin originated in Africa, while others developed independently in Europe and Asia. This genetic complexity undermines simplistic narratives about human difference. The evolution of skin color represents not a divergence of separate human lineages, but a remarkable demonstration of convergent evolution, different populations developing similar traits for similar reasons. There are also practical medical implications to this research. Understanding the relationship between skin pigmentation, sunlight exposure, and vitamin D production helps explain different disease vulnerabilities across populations. For example, people with darker skin living in northern latitudes may face higher risks of vitamin D deficiency, while lighter-skinned individuals in tropical regions face increased risks of sun damage and skin cancer. These insights have real consequences for public health. The story of skin color evolution also illustrates how cultural practices can interact with biological adaptation. Clothing, diet, and other cultural innovations have sometimes supplemented or even partially replaced biological adaptations to environmental challenges. If we confirm that lighter skin evolved primarily for vitamin D production, we must then ask, how did dark-skinned populations survive in northern regions before vitamin D supplementation? The answer likely involves cultural adaptations like specialized diets rich in vitamin D. As we explore this evolutionary mystery, we're not merely investigating the past. We're examining how human biology continues to interact with changing environments today, offering insights into our ongoing biological and cultural evolution. This story also reminds us of our species' remarkable adaptive flexibility. Unlike most animals, humans have colonized virtually every terrestrial environment on Earth, using both biological adaptation and cultural innovation to survive in diverse conditions. The science of skin pigmentation challenges us to think across disciplines, connecting genetics, anthropology, nutrition, and even cultural studies. This interdisciplinary approach represents the cutting edge of modern evolutionary biology. Understanding skin color evolution also provides perspective on how rapidly humans continue to move around the globe, creating new patterns of genetic admixture and environmental adaptation that will shape our future evolution. Perhaps most fundamentally, this story reminds us that human biology is not static but dynamic, responding to environmental pressures through the mechanism of natural selection. We are not separate from nature but part of it, shaped by the same forces that shape all life. As we examine the evidence for how and why humans develop different skin colors, we'll see that this visible difference, which has so often been misused to divide humanity, actually tells a unifying story about our shared evolutionary journey. Chapter 3: Out of Africa into New Light. To understand the evolution of human skin pigmentation, we must begin at the beginning, with the emergence of our species in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago. These early Homo sapiens had dark, melanin-rich skin perfectly adapted to the intense ultraviolet radiation of equatorial regions. Melanin, the pigment that gives skin its color, serves a crucial biological function. It acts as a natural sunscreen, protecting the body from harmful ultraviolet B, UVB, radiation that can damage cellular DNA and break down essential nutrients like folate. In the sun-drenched environments of Africa where humans evolved, high melanin production provided a clear survival advantage. Individuals with darker skin were better protected against sunburn, skin cancer, and, perhaps most importantly, folate degradation. Folate, a B vitamin essential for DNA synthesis and cell division, is particularly important during pregnancy. Folate deficiency can cause severe birth defects, making protection of this vital nutrient a powerful selective pressure on early human populations. For hundreds of thousands of years, all humans shared this adaptation for high melanin production. The archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that early humans throughout Africa had dark skin, an adaptation that remained stable as long as humans stayed near the equator. But approximately 50,000 to 100,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. Small groups of humans began venturing out of Africa, initiating a migration that would eventually spread our species across the entire planet. These migrating groups faced unprecedented environmental challenges. As they moved northward into the Middle East, Central Asia, and eventually Europe, they encountered dramatically different conditions, most notably, significantly reduced levels of ultraviolet radiation. In these northern regions, the sun's rays strike the Earth at a more oblique angle, especially during winter months. Cloud cover and seasonal changes further reduce UV exposure. This seemingly simple geographic fact would have profound biological consequences. The same dark skin that protected against excessive UV radiation near the equator became potentially problematic in these northern latitudes. While protection from UV damage remained beneficial, these early migrants faced a new challenge: getting enough sunlight for essential biological processes. Most critically, human skin uses UVB radiation to synthesize vitamin D, a nutrient essential for calcium absorption, bone development, immune function, and numerous other physiological processes. Without sufficient vitamin D, humans develop serious health problems. The most severe vitamin D deficiency causes rickets, a disease that leads to bone deformities, stunted growth, and pelvic abnormalities that can make childbirth difficult or fatal. Even moderate deficiencies impair immune function and overall health. For early humans moving into less sunny regions, this created an evolutionary dilemma. Their dark skin protected against UV damage, but also blocked the limited sunlight available for vitamin D synthesis. This trade-off would become a powerful selective pressure. According to the leading theory, this selective pressure gradually favored individuals with lighter skin in northern populations. Those with less melanin could produce vitamin D more efficiently with limited sun exposure, giving them a survival and reproductive advantage. The genetic evidence suggests this adaptation didn't happen overnight. It likely occurred over thousands of years as specific genetic mutations affecting melanin production became more common in populations living at higher latitudes. What makes this evolutionary story particularly interesting is that lighter skin appears to have evolved independently in different populations. Genetic studies show that Europeans and East Asians developed lighter skin through different genetic pathways. This represents convergent evolution, different populations independently evolving similar traits in response to similar environmental pressures. It's a powerful demonstration of how natural selection can produce comparable adaptations through different genetic means. The timing of these changes remains debated, but recent genetic evidence suggests that the lightening of European skin occurred relatively recently, perhaps within the last 8,000 years, much later than previously thought. This timing coincides with another major transition in human history, the adoption of agriculture. As hunter-gatherers became farmers, their diets changed dramatically, potentially reducing natural sources of vitamin D and intensifying selection for lighter skin. The agricultural transition also meant more permanent settlements and less nomadic movement. This reduced seasonal migration that might have allowed earlier Europeans to receive adequate UVB exposure during summer months regardless of skin color. For Europeans living in fixed agricultural settlements, the inability to follow optimal seasonal conditions may have intensified selection for lighter skin as a year-round adaptation to low UVB environments. The story is further complicated by evidence that very early Europeans, before the agricultural transition, may have had darker skin than previously assumed. The 2018 analysis of Cheddar Man, a 10,000-year-old skeleton from Britain, suggested he likely had dark skin. If confirmed, this finding would further compress the timeline for skin lightening in Europe, suggesting extremely rapid selection once agricultural lifestyles became dominant. This accelerated timeline highlights just how powerful the selective pressure must have been. In East Asia, the genetic pathways to lighter skin appear different, and the timing may have varied as well. This suggests multiple independent adaptations to similar environmental conditions, a fascinating example of different biological solutions to the same problem. As we trace human migration further north into Arctic regions, we encounter an interesting exception to the latitude pigmentation pattern. Indigenous Arctic populations often have somewhat darker skin than would be predicted by their latitude alone. This apparent contradiction actually supports the vitamin D hypothesis when we consider their traditional diet. Arctic populations consume diets extremely rich in vitamin D, obtaining this crucial nutrient from marine mammals, fatty fish, and other animal sources. This dietary adaptation may have reduced the selective pressure for light skin, allowing these populations to maintain moderate pigmentation despite living in regions with very low UV radiation for much of the year. Chapter 4. The vitamin D hypothesis, the predominant scientific explanation for the evolution of lighter skin in certain human populations centers on vitamin D, a nutrient so essential to human health that our bodies evolved the ability to synthesize it when sunlight strikes our skin. Unlike most vitamins, which must be obtained entirely from diet, vitamin D represents a hybrid nutrient. While some foods contain vitamin D, the primary source for most humans throughout evolutionary history has been endogenous synthesis triggered by ultraviolet B radiation. When UVB radiation penetrates the skin, it converts a cholesterol-like precursor molecule, 7-dehydrocholesterol, into pre-vitamin D3, which then undergoes further transformation into the biologically active form our bodies can use. This process is remarkably efficient in sunny environments. A light-skinned person can produce about 10,000 to 20,000 IU of vitamin D in just 30 minutes of summer sun exposure, far more than the recommended daily allowance. But this synthesis is heavily influenced by both environmental factors and skin pigmentation. Cloud cover, pollution, latitude, season, time of day, and clothing all affect how much UVB radiation reaches the skin. Most significantly for our evolutionary story, melanin, the pigment that gives skin its color, acts as a natural sunscreen, absorbing UVB radiation. While this protects against DNA damage, it also reduces vitamin D production. Studies suggest that highly pigmented skin may require 5 to 10 times longer sun exposure to produce the same amount of vitamin D as lightly pigmented skin. This difference becomes critically important in regions with limited sunlight. In equatorial regions, sunlight is abundant year-round, allowing even heavily pigmented individuals to synthesize sufficient vitamin D despite melanin's filtering effect. But as humans migrated northward, this equation changed dramatically. Beyond approximately 35 degrees latitude north or south, the available UVB radiation drops significantly during winter months. In regions like Northern Europe, the winter sun is too low in the sky for any meaningful vitamin D production regardless of skin color. For early human migrants to these northern regions, this created a potential crisis. Their genetically dark skin, evolved for equatorial conditions, would have severely limited their ability to produce vitamin D during the short summer months. Vitamin D deficiency is not merely uncomfortable, it can be deadly. Severe deficiency causes rickets in children, with its characteristic bowed legs, stunted growth, and skeletal deformities. In adults, it leads to osteomalacia, causing bone pain, muscle weakness, and increased fracture risk. Perhaps most significantly for natural selection, vitamin D deficiency in women causes pelvic deformities that can make childbirth dangerous or fatal. It also impairs fertility and immune function, creating multiple pathways through which it could affect reproductive success. This creates exactly the conditions where natural selection operates most powerfully, a trait directly affecting survival and reproduction, with genetic variation allowing some individuals to better withstand the environmental challenge. Individuals with genetic variants producing less melanin would have absorbed more UVB radiation during limited summer months, synthesizing more vitamin D. This advantage would translate to better health, higher fertility, and increased survival of offspring. Over generations, these genetic variants would become more common in the population through this selective advantage, gradually changing the average skin tone of the entire population without requiring any conscious selection or awareness of the process. The geographic distribution of indigenous skin pigmentation strongly supports this hypothesis. If we map average skin color of indigenous populations against latitude, controlling for recent migration, we find a striking correlation. Lighter skin is more common at higher latitudes. This correlation holds true across continents, with some notable exceptions that actually strengthen rather than weaken the vitamin D hypothesis. For instance, the Inuit of the Arctic have somewhat darker skin than their latitude would predict. However, traditional Inuit diets were exceptionally rich in vitamin D from marine sources like fatty fish and seal blubber. This dietary adaptation would reduce selective pressure for lighter skin, explaining the apparent exception to the latitude pattern. Similarly, traditional fishing communities in Scandinavia maintain darker pigmentation than inland agricultural populations at the same latitude, likely due to higher vitamin D intake from their seafood-rich diets. The genetic evidence further supports the vitamin D hypothesis. Several genes associated with skin pigmentation show strong signatures of positive selection in European and East Asian populations, indicating these traits were actively favored by natural selection. One such gene, SLC24A5, has a variant that reduces melanin production and is present in nearly 100% of Europeans, but rare in African populations. This variant appears to have been strongly selected for in European populations within the last 10,000 years. Interestingly, genetic analysis suggests that East Asian populations achieved lighter skin through different genetic pathways than Europeans. This represents convergent evolution, different populations independently developing similar adaptations to similar environmental pressures. This genetic evidence reveals something remarkable. The lightening of skin in European and East Asian populations represents one of the strongest examples of recent natural selection in the human genome. Few other traits show such clear signatures of strong selection. The vitamin D hypothesis also helps explain why eye and hair color diversified in European populations. Unlike skin, hair and eyes don't play a crucial role in vitamin D synthesis. So once selection for skin lightening relaxed genetic constraints, these traits became more variable. While the vitamin D hypothesis has substantial supporting evidence, scientific debate continues about whether it fully explains the pattern of human skin pigmentation evolution. Several researchers have proposed additional or alternative explanations. One alternative hypothesis suggests that sexual selection, preference for mates with certain skin tones, may have played a role in skin color evolution. However, this fails to explain the strong correlation between skin tone and latitude across multiple continents. Another hypothesis proposes that lighter skin evolved as protection against certain diseases more common in northern climates. While intriguing, this explanation lacks the strong supporting evidence of the vitamin D hypothesis. Some researchers have suggested that dietary changes associated with the shift to agriculture may have intensified selection for lighter skin by reducing natural dietary sources of vitamin D. This would align with genetic evidence suggesting relatively recent selection. The folate hypothesis offers an important complementary explanation, suggesting that darker skin in equatorial regions protects against folate degradation caused by UV radiation. Folate is essential for DNA synthesis and repair, with deficiencies causing neural tube defects in developing fetuses. This dual nutrient hypothesis, protection of folate in high UV environments and production of vitamin D in low UV environments, may explain the full spectrum of human skin pigmentation better than either factor alone. Recent genetic discoveries have revealed that the story is even more complex than previously thought. Some genetic variants associated with lighter skin in Europeans actually originated in Africa, suggesting a more nuanced evolutionary history than simple north-south adaptation. The emergence of ancient DNA analysis has further complicated the picture. Studies of Neolithic European remains suggest that the transition to lighter skin may have occurred more recently than previously thought, potentially within the last 8,000 years. If true, this compressed timeline makes the evolution of lighter skin one of the most rapid and dramatic examples of natural selection in recent human history. But it also raises a puzzling question. How did earlier Europeans with darker skin survive in low UV environments? This question leads us to perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the skin color evolution story: the complex interaction between biological adaptation, cultural innovation, and human dietary practices across different environments. As we'll explore in the next section, the true story of human skin color evolution appears to involve not just genetics, but also cultural adaptations, migration patterns, and changing lifestyles that created novel selective pressures on human populations. The vitamin D hypothesis stands as our most compelling explanation for why certain human populations developed lighter skin. But as with many aspects of human evolution, the complete picture involves multiple factors interacting in complex ways across time and space. This ongoing scientific investigation reminds us that human biological diversity represents adaptation to different environments, not hierarchy or separate evolutionary paths. It tells a story not of division, but of our species' remarkable adaptive flexibility. Chapter 5. Challenging the vitamin D consensus. While the vitamin D hypothesis provides a compelling explanation for skin color variation, several contradictions and anomalies challenge this neat evolutionary narrative. As with many scientific theories, the closer we look, the more complex the picture becomes. One significant anomaly involves the timing of skin lightening in Europe. Recent genomic studies of ancient DNA suggest that light skin pigmentation in Europeans emerged surprisingly late, perhaps only 8,000 years ago, much later than the initial migration into Europe. If Europeans maintained relatively darker skin for tens of thousands of years after migrating northward, how did they survive the presumed vitamin D deficiency? This temporal gap raises questions about whether the selective pressure was as immediate or severe as often portrayed. The analysis of Cheddar Man, a 10,000-year-old skeleton found in Britain, provides a compelling data point. Genetic reconstruction suggests he likely had dark skin and blue eyes, a combination rarely seen today but potentially common in early European hunter-gatherers. If accurate, this finding suggests that the transition to lighter skin in Europe occurred after the adoption of agriculture. This timing contradicts the simple narrative of immediate adaptation to northern latitudes and suggests other factors may have intensified selection pressures. Another anomaly concerns the Arctic populations mentioned earlier. Traditional Inuit and other circumpolar peoples have moderate skin pigmentation despite living where UV radiation is minimal for much of the year. Their traditional diet rich in vitamin D explains this exception, but this dietary adaptation raises a broader question. Could other populations have similarly relied on cultural adaptations rather than biological evolution to solve the vitamin D challenge? If so, what triggered the eventual strong selection for lighter skin? We see another contradiction when comparing pigmentation in East Asians and Europeans living at similar latitudes. While both populations evolved lighter skin, they did so through different genetic pathways, and the degree of lightening doesn't precisely match latitude predictions. Japanese and Korean populations, for instance, generally have somewhat darker skin than Europeans at similar latitudes. This variation suggests that factors beyond simple UV gradients influenced the evolution of skin pigmentation across different populations. The diet hypothesis offers one potential explanation. Traditional East Asian diets rich in seafood provided natural vitamin D sources, possibly reducing selective pressure for extreme skin lightening compared to the more terrestrial diets of ancient Europeans. But dietary factors create another timeline problem. If dietary changes associated with agriculture intensified selection for lighter skin, why did East Asian agricultural populations maintain somewhat darker skin than European farmers at similar latitudes? The recent selection problem extends beyond Europe. Genomic evidence suggests that some key genetic variants for lighter skin in East Asians also show signatures of recent selection, indicating relatively rapid changes rather than gradual adaptation over tens of thousands of years. This pattern of recent, rapid selection across multiple populations challenges the simple narrative of gradual adaptation following migration. Something appears to have intensified selection for lighter skin in the relatively recent past. But what? Another anomaly involves skin color variation within tropical regions. While the vitamin D hypothesis predicts uniformly dark skin near the equator, we actually see considerable variation in indigenous skin tones across different equatorial populations. Indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest, for instance, often have lighter skin than populations in equatorial Africa, despite similar UV exposure. This variation suggests additional factors beyond simple UV protection shape human skin pigmentation. The forest canopy hypothesis proposes that the dense tree coverage in rainforest environments reduces ground-level UV exposure, potentially relaxing selection for darker skin. But this explanation remains contested and doesn't account for all tropical variation. High-altitude populations present another interesting anomaly. Indigenous people in the Andes and Tibetan Plateau experience higher UV exposure due to elevation, yet don't show the darker pigmentation we might predict based solely on UV intensity. Cultural adaptations like protective clothing might explain some of these variations. But the consistency of these patterns suggests that multiple environmental factors beyond just latitude and UV exposure have shaped human skin pigmentation around the world. The sexual selection hypothesis offers an alternative explanation for some of these anomalies. This theory suggests that mate preferences for certain skin tones might have influenced pigmentation independently from or in addition to natural selection for vitamin D production. However, sexual selection typically produces divergent traits between populations rather than convergent evolution. The fact that East Asians and Europeans independently evolved lighter skin suggests a common environmental pressure rather than arbitrary aesthetic preferences. Recent genomic discoveries have revealed another complication. Some genetic variants associated with lighter skin in Europeans actually originated in Africa. This challenges the narrative that lighter skin evolved only after humans left Africa. For instance, a variant of the SLC24A5 gene strongly associated with lighter skin in Europeans has been found at low frequencies in East African populations. This suggests a more complex evolutionary history than simple north-south adaptation. Some researchers propose that skin pigmentation may have been more variable within Africa during early human evolution than previously thought, with selection for uniformly dark skin intensifying as humans moved into more open environments. A particularly puzzling anomaly involves folate protection. If darker skin evolved primarily to protect folate from UV degradation, we might expect selection to favor mechanisms that protect folate while still allowing vitamin D synthesis. Yet no such perfect adaptation emerged. Instead, human populations seem to have evolved compromises based on their specific environments. Darker skin where UV protection outweighs vitamin D needs, and lighter skin where the opposite is true. But the trade-off remains suboptimal in many environments. This suboptimal adaptation suggests that either the selective pressures weren't strong enough to drive more perfect solutions, or that genetic or developmental constraints limited the possible adaptations. Either explanation complicates our evolutionary narrative. The farmer hypothesis offers potential insight into these anomalies. This theory suggests that the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture dramatically changed human diets, reducing natural vitamin D sources and intensifying selection for endogenous synthesis. This would explain the apparent acceleration of skin lightening in the relatively recent past, as well as some of the variation between populations with different traditional subsistence patterns. But it raises questions about how pre-agricultural Europeans survived with darker skin. Perhaps the most significant anomaly involves the interaction between clothing, culture, and biological adaptation. Humans are unique in our ability to modify our environment through culture, potentially changing the selective pressures acting on our biology. Early humans likely used animal hides for protection long before leaving Africa. As they moved northward, more comprehensive clothing would have been essential for survival in colder climates. But this same clothing would block the UV radiation needed for vitamin D synthesis. This creates a paradox. The cultural adaptation necessary for survival in colder climates, protective clothing, would have intensified vitamin D deficiency regardless of skin color. How did early humans resolve this contradiction? The seasonal exposure hypothesis suggests that northern populations may have maximized sun exposure during summer months while remaining protected in winter. But this would have required sophisticated understanding of seasonal needs that isn't well documented. The agricultural transition approximately 10,000 years ago further complicates the picture. Farmers typically spend more time outdoors than hunter-gatherers, potentially increasing UV exposure. Yet genetic evidence suggests skin lightening accelerated after agriculture emerged. This contradiction might be resolved by considering the nutritional changes associated with early farming. Agricultural diets were often less diverse than hunter-gatherer diets, potentially reducing natural vitamin D sources and increasing dependence on cutaneous synthesis. The geographical pattern of skin pigmentation shows another interesting anomaly. The correlation with latitude appears stronger in the Old World than in the Americas. Indigenous populations in the Americas show less extreme variation from south to north. This difference might reflect the more recent settlement of the Americas, providing less time for selection to act on skin color. Or it might suggest different selective pressures in the Americas compared to Eurasia and Africa. Perhaps the most profound anomaly is the rapid pace of skin color evolution itself. Few human traits show such strong signatures of recent selection, suggesting that skin pigmentation faced unusually intense selective pressures compared to other aspects of human biology. Chapter 6: Cultural Explanations and Alternative Theories. Beyond the scientific explanations for human skin color variation, we find a rich tapestry of cultural narratives, myths, and alternative theories. While many of these lack scientific support, they provide fascinating insights into how different societies have understood human diversity. Virtually every culture has developed explanations for human differences, including skin color. These traditional narratives range from divine creation stories to tales of ancestral journeys, each reflecting the worldview and values of its originating culture. In many indigenous Australian traditions, skin color differences are explained through dreamtime stories, spiritual narratives about the creation of the world. These stories typically emphasize the spiritual unity of humanity despite physical differences. Ancient Egyptian artwork shows a nuanced awareness of skin color variation, depicting Egyptians with reddish-brown skin, Nubians with darker skin, and peoples from the Near East with lighter skin. These distinctions were geographical rather than hierarchical. In contrast, ancient Greek and Roman writers developed early environmental theories of human variation. Aristotle and others proposed that climate directly shaped human appearance and character, with hotter climates producing darker skin and cooler climates lighter skin. While these ancient climate theories contained seeds of environmental adaptation concepts, they lacked understanding of inheritance, natural selection, and the generational timescales necessary for evolutionary change. Medieval European explanations for skin color differences often incorporated religious narratives. The Curse of Ham interpretation from Genesis became particularly influential, falsely suggesting that darker skin represented divine punishment, a narrative later misused to justify slavery. During the Enlightenment, early scientific attempts to classify human variation emerged, but these were deeply flawed by the racial prejudices of their time. Figures like Carl Linnaeus and Johann Blumenbach developed classification systems that mistakenly treated skin color as defining separate human types. These early taxonomic systems, despite their scientific veneer, typically reflected and reinforced European colonial perspectives rather than objective biological reality. They often ranked human groups hierarchically based on subjective assessments of civilizational achievement. The 19th century brought the misappropriation of Darwinian concepts to create scientific racism, the false claim that human races represented separate evolutionary lineages with inherent differences in capability. This pseudoscience contradicted Darwin's own understanding of human unity. These historical misconceptions about human skin color variation persist in popular consciousness despite being thoroughly debunked by modern genetics, which confirms that humans are remarkably homogeneous compared to other primates. Beyond these historical perspectives, several alternative scientific hypotheses have emerged to explain human skin pigmentation variation. While less supported than the vitamin D hypothesis, these theories offer additional perspectives worth considering. The sexual selection hypothesis proposes that mate preferences for certain skin tones influenced pigmentation patterns. While sexual selection certainly shapes many traits, the consistent correlation between skin color and latitude across continents makes this unlikely as a primary driver. The infection resistance hypothesis suggests that melanin may provide protection against certain pathogens more common in tropical environments. Some evidence indicates that melanin can bind to microorganisms and inhibit their growth, potentially providing immunological benefits. However, the geographic pattern of skin pigmentation correlates more strongly with UV radiation than with pathogen distribution, suggesting that if infection resistance played a role, it was likely secondary to UV-related adaptations. The skin cancer hypothesis proposes that protection against skin cancer drove selection for darker skin in high UV environments. While melanin certainly provides protection against UV-induced DNA damage, skin cancer typically affects people after reproductive age. Since natural selection primarily acts on traits affecting reproductive success, the skin cancer hypothesis faces a timeline problem. Most skin cancers develop too late in life to significantly impact genetic contribution to future generations. However, recent research suggests that severe sunburn and UV damage in infancy and childhood could potentially affect reproductive success later in life, providing a mechanism through which selection against skin cancer might operate. The thermoregulation hypothesis suggests that skin pigmentation may influence how the body manages heat. Darker skin absorbs more solar radiation, potentially providing warming benefits in cooler morning and evening temperatures near the equator. This hypothesis remains speculative, as the evidence for significant thermoregulatory differences based on skin pigmentation is limited. Body size, shape, and subcutaneous fat distribution likely play much larger roles in human thermal adaptation. The camouflage hypothesis proposes that skin color evolved partly for concealment during hunting. This explanation has little supporting evidence and fails to explain the consistent latitude correlation or why both males and females share similar pigmentation patterns. Some fringe theories suggest that human skin color differences reflect hybridization with other hominid species like Neanderthals. While modern humans do carry some Neanderthal DNA, genetic evidence confirms that skin color variation evolved within Homo sapiens. Perhaps the most intriguing out-of-place evidence comes from the genetics of pigmentation itself. Recent genomic studies have identified hundreds of genetic variants influencing skin color, far more than the handful of major genes previously recognized. This genetic complexity suggests that human skin color is not a simple trait controlled by a few genes, but rather a sophisticated polygenic adaptation involving numerous genetic pathways. This complexity challenges simplistic narratives about skin color evolution. Particularly surprising was the discovery that some genetic variants associated with lighter skin in Europeans originated in Africa. This suggests that the genetic potential for varied skin pigmentation existed in African populations before human migration out of Africa. Another unexpected finding involves ancient DNA analysis of European hunter-gatherers. These studies suggest that the combination of dark skin with light eyes, unusual today, may have been common in Europe until relatively recently. The discovery that European skin lightening may have accelerated after the adoption of agriculture challenges the simple migration north explanation. This timing aligns with significant dietary changes, suggesting cultural practices strongly influenced biological adaptation. Archaeological evidence of fishing technology and marine food consumption in ancient European populations raises questions about the vitamin D narrative. If these populations consumed vitamin D-rich seafood, why was selection for lighter skin still so strong? Similarly puzzling is evidence that early humans in northern latitudes survived for thousands of years before significant skin lightening occurred. This temporal gap suggests either that vitamin D deficiency was less immediately threatening than often portrayed, or that cultural adaptations temporarily reduced selective pressure. Clothing artifacts and evidence of animal hide processing from archaeological sites confirm that early humans used protective coverings long before developing lighter skin. This cultural adaptation would have complicated the relationship between environment and skin pigmentation. Nutritional analysis of ancient diets reveals another complication. Many hunter-gatherer diets provided significantly more vitamin D than early agricultural diets. This dietary shift may explain why selection for lighter skin appears to have intensified after the adoption of farming. Modern medical studies provide additional perspective, showing that vitamin D deficiency affects reproductive health in multiple ways beyond the classic symptoms of rickets. These include reduced fertility, increased pregnancy complications, and immune system impairments. These reproductive effects would create strong selective pressure even if severe rickets was relatively rare, potentially explaining why selection for lighter skin was so powerful despite evidence that early Europeans survived with darker pigmentation. Perhaps most fascinating is evidence from populations that have recently migrated to new UV environments. Studies of Indian populations in Britain, for instance, show vitamin D deficiency is common despite cultural adaptations like dietary supplements. This modern parallel suggests that migration to new UV environments creates genuine biological challenges that can't be completely overcome through cultural means alone, lending credibility to the underlying premise of the vitamin D hypothesis despite its complications. Chapter 7: The Sunlight Connection. The story of human skin color has far greater implications than merely explaining our surface appearance. It reveals fundamental principles about how our species has adapted to diverse environments and continues to face new challenges in our changing world. As we've explored the evidence and contradictions in this evolutionary narrative, a more nuanced picture emerges, one where biology and culture intertwine in complex ways, shaping human adaptation across tens of thousands of years. The stakes of this investigation extend beyond academic curiosity. Understanding the true relationship between human biology, environment, and cultural practice has profound implications for how we conceptualize human difference and how we address modern health challenges. Consider how the evolutionary perspective reframes contemporary health disparities. When darker-skinned individuals migrate to higher latitudes, they face increased risk of vitamin D deficiency, not due to inherent biological inferiority, but because of a mismatch between biology and environment. Similarly, lighter-skinned populations in tropical environments face elevated risks of sun damage and skin cancer. These health vulnerabilities result from evolutionary history rather than biological determinism, a crucial distinction with important medical and ethical implications. Our evolving understanding of skin color adaptation challenges persistent myths about human racial categories. The gradients of human skin pigmentation across geographic space don't align with discrete racial groupings, but rather demonstrate continuous adaptation to environmental conditions. The genetic evidence is clear. There are no distinct biological races within humanity. What we observe instead is local adaptation to specific environmental conditions, with skin color representing just one of many such adaptations. This perspective fundamentally undermines racist ideologies that have misinterpreted human variation as evidence of separate evolutionary paths or inherent hierarchies. The science tells a different story, one of remarkable human unity with superficial adaptations to local conditions. The timing of skin pigmentation changes raises particularly intriguing questions about the relationship between biological and cultural evolution. If European skin lightening accelerated after the adoption of agriculture, this suggests powerful interactions between lifestyle and genetic selection. This agricultural connection highlights a profound truth about human evolution. Unlike other species, our cultural innovations often create new selective pressures on our biology. We shape our environment through culture, and that environment in turn shapes our biological evolution. This dynamic continues today, though modern technology has altered the equation. Vitamin D supplements, fortified foods, sunscreen, and global migration have changed the relationship between skin pigmentation, sunlight exposure, and health outcomes. Yet these cultural solutions remain imperfect. Vitamin D deficiency remains common worldwide, affecting an estimated billion people despite supplementation efforts. This suggests the evolutionary challenges our ancestors faced were genuine and significant. Similarly, skin cancer rates continue to rise globally, particularly in light-skinned populations exposed to tropical UV levels. Our biological adaptations evolved for specific environments, creating vulnerabilities when populations move or environments change. Climate change adds another layer of complexity to this picture. As UV radiation patterns shift due to changes in atmospheric composition and human migration patterns accelerate, the relationship between human biology and environment continues to evolve. The speed of these environmental changes far outpaces biological evolution. Modern humans must increasingly rely on cultural adaptations, sunscreen, vitamin supplementation, protective clothing, and medical interventions to bridge the gap between our evolved biology and current conditions. This necessity for cultural adaptation isn't new. Evidence suggests our ancestors relied on cultural innovations to survive in challenging environments long before biological adaptations like lighter skin had time to evolve. The true power of humanity has always been this combination of biological and cultural adaptation. Unlike other species that must wait for genetic changes to adapt to new environments, humans use cultural innovation to thrive in diverse conditions. As we face unprecedented global challenges, this dual adaptive capability becomes increasingly valuable. Climate change, environmental degradation, and technological transformation create novel selective pressures unlike anything in our evolutionary history. Understanding how our ancestors navigated the complex interplay between biology and culture provides valuable insights for addressing these modern challenges. The story of skin color evolution exemplifies this dynamic relationship. Perhaps the most profound implication concerns our conception of human difference. If skin color represents environmental adaptation rather than fundamental biological division, this challenges the very foundation of racial categorization. The genomic revolution has confirmed what anthropologists long suspected. The visible traits we associate with race represent a tiny fraction of human genetic variation. These traits gained outsized importance in human societies not because of their biological significance, but because of their visibility. Skin color, eye shape, and hair texture are immediately apparent, while the vast majority of human genetic variation remains invisible to the naked eye. This visibility made these traits convenient markers for social categorization throughout history. But the science tells a different story. These visible traits evolved independently through convergent evolution in response to similar environmental conditions. They don't define separate human lineages or meaningful biological groupings. This scientific understanding has enormous ethical implications. If human differences represent environmental adaptations rather than essential biological divisions, this undermines justifications for discrimination and prejudice based on physical appearance. The story of skin color evolution also highlights the remarkable plasticity of the human genome. The relatively rapid emergence of lighter skin in certain populations demonstrates how quickly natural selection can act when survival advantages are significant. This genetic plasticity has been crucial to human success as a species. Our ancestors faced dramatically different environments as they spread across the globe, from tropical rainforests to arid deserts, from sea level to high altitude, from equatorial heat to Arctic cold. In each new environment, both biological adaptation and cultural innovation allowed humans to survive and thrive. This dual adaptive capability, genetic change and cultural invention, made Homo sapiens the most widely distributed land mammal on Earth. Modern genomic studies have revealed just how extensive these local adaptations are. Beyond skin color, human populations show adaptations for high-altitude oxygen use, cold tolerance, diving ability, lactose digestion, alcohol metabolism, disease resistance, and countless other traits. Each of these adaptations tells a story similar to skin pigmentation. Local populations developing genetic advantages for specific environmental conditions while remaining part of a single, interconnected human species. This perspective transforms how we understand human history. Rather than separate races following different evolutionary paths, we see one remarkably adaptable species using both biology and culture to colonize diverse environments across the planet. The skin color story also reveals how frequently culture and biology interact in human evolution. Cultural innovations like clothing, shelter, and diet modified the selective pressures acting on human biology, creating feedback loops between cultural and biological evolution. This dynamic continues today, though modern medicine and technology have altered the equation. Glasses correct vision deficits, antibiotics fight infections, and reproductive technologies overcome fertility challenges, all reducing certain selective pressures that shaped human evolution. Yet new selective pressures emerge. Modern diets, sedentary lifestyles, environmental pollutants, and novel pathogens create new challenges for human biology. Our evolutionary story continues, shaped by the ongoing interplay between genes, environment, and culture. As we look to the future, the lessons from skin color evolution take on renewed relevance. Human populations continue to mix through migration and globalization, creating new genetic combinations and reducing the geographic isolation that drove many local adaptations. Climate change alters the environmental conditions that shaped human evolution, potentially creating mismatches between our evolved biology and current environments. Cultural solutions become increasingly important as environmental change outpaces genetic adaptation. The study of human adaptation also provides crucial context for emerging genetic technologies. As gene editing becomes increasingly feasible, understanding how natural selection has shaped human biology helps inform ethical boundaries and potential applications. The stakes of misunderstanding human variation remain high. Throughout history, misconceptions about human difference have fueled discrimination, exploitation, and violence. Scientific accuracy about human variation is not merely academic. It has profound ethical implications. By understanding skin color as an adaptive response to environmental conditions rather than a marker of separate human types, we gain a more accurate picture of human biology and a more ethical framework for understanding human difference. This evolutionary perspective reminds us that human variation represents our species' remarkable adaptability rather than division. The visible differences between human populations tell a story not of separation, but of successful adaptation to diverse environments. As we continue exploring the evidence for how humans developed different skin colors, we'll examine the most recent genomic discoveries that have transformed our understanding of this complex evolutionary story, revealing unexpected pathways, multiple independent adaptations, and surprising connections. These genetic insights offer the most detailed picture yet of how natural selection shaped human appearance across different environments and time periods. They also provide new perspectives on the ongoing debate about the primary selective pressures driving skin color evolution. Behind these scientific discussions lies a profound truth. human biological variation represents a remarkable success story of adaptation and survival. Our differences emerged not as arbitrary divisions, but as ingenious solutions to environmental challenges faced by our ancestors. Chapter 8: Beyond Vitamin D. The complex truth. As we've explored the vitamin D hypothesis and its complications, it's time to examine the most compelling alternative and complementary theories. The evidence suggests that while vitamin D played a crucial role, the full story of human skin pigmentation involves multiple selective pressures working in concert. The most significant complementary theory is the folate hypothesis, proposed by anthropologist Nina Jablonski and geographer George Chaplin. This theory suggests that protection of folate, not just vitamin D synthesis, played a central role in skin color evolution. Folate, vitamin B9, is essential for DNA synthesis, cell division, and fetal development. Critically, it can be degraded by ultraviolet radiation penetrating the skin. Folate deficiency during pregnancy increases risks of neural tube defects and other serious developmental problems. This creates a compelling evolutionary explanation for dark skin in high UV environments. Individuals with more melanin would better protect their folate reserves from degradation, potentially experiencing greater reproductive success through healthier pregnancies and offspring. The folate hypothesis elegantly complements the vitamin D explanation. Together, they suggest that human skin pigmentation evolved as a compromise between two opposing selective pressures: the need to protect folate in high UV environments and the need to synthesize vitamin D in low UV regions. This dual nutrient hypothesis explains the observed correlation between skin pigmentation and latitude better than either factor alone. It frames skin color as a balanced adaptation to the most critical limiting factor in each environment. Near the equator, where UV radiation is intense year-round, folate protection would be the primary selective pressure, favoring darker skin despite the minor reduction in vitamin D synthesis. Abundant sunlight ensures sufficient vitamin D production even through darkly pigmented skin. At higher latitudes, where UV exposure is limited, vitamin D synthesis becomes the critical limiting factor. Here, selection would favor lighter skin to maximize vitamin D production during limited sunny periods, despite reduced protection for folate. This balancing act explains why we see a gradient of skin colors across latitudes rather than a simple dark/light dichotomy. Each population's skin color represents an evolutionary compromise optimized for their ancestral environment's specific UV conditions. Recent research strengthens the folate hypothesis. Studies have confirmed that UV radiation does indeed break down folate in human blood, and that darker skin provides significant protection against this degradation. The folate hypothesis also helps explain some anomalies in the vitamin D narrative. For instance, the persistence of somewhat darker skin in East Asian populations compared to Europeans at similar latitudes might reflect different dietary folate levels affecting the optimal balance point. However, the dual nutrient hypothesis still doesn't explain all observed patterns of human pigmentation. Other selective pressures likely contributed to the complex mosaic of human skin color variation we see today. The thermoregulation hypothesis offers another complementary explanation. This theory proposes that darker skin may provide thermoregulatory advantages in hot, sunny environments by absorbing more solar radiation at the skin surface rather than allowing it to penetrate deeper tissues. While less supported than the nutrient hypotheses, some evidence suggests melanin might influence heat dissipation through sweating efficiency and skin blood flow. These effects could have provided additional selective advantages beyond UV protection in certain environments. Another compelling theory involves skin barrier function. Melanin contributes to skin barrier integrity, potentially offering protection against water loss, pathogen invasion, and environmental damage. These properties might have influenced skin pigmentation evolution in specific environments. The antimicrobial properties of melanin provide another potential selective advantage. Research suggests melanin can bind to microorganisms and inhibit their growth, potentially offering additional protection against certain pathogens more prevalent in tropical environments. Sexual selection likely played a role as well, though probably secondary to environmental adaptation. Mate preferences could have accelerated or modified selection for certain skin tones within the range permitted by environmental constraints. Studies of contemporary mate preferences show varying patterns across cultures, with some favoring lighter skin and others darker skin. These preferences often correlate with associations between skin tone and health, youth, or social status rather than arbitrary aesthetic standards. Archaeological evidence suggests that symbolic use of pigments, including body painting, dates back at least 100,000 years. This cultural practice may have interacted with biological skin pigmentation in complex ways, potentially influencing sexual selection and social signaling. The most compelling recent theory integrates these multiple pressures into a comprehensive framework that accounts for both the geographical patterns and apparent anomalies in human skin pigmentation. This integrated model proposes that human skin color evolved primarily through the interaction of four key factors: vitamin D synthesis, folate protection, barrier function requirements, and cultural adaptations, with the relative importance of each varying across environments. Near the equator, folate protection and possibly antimicrobial benefits would dominate, favoring darker skin. In mid-latitude regions with seasonal UV variation, the compromise between vitamin D synthesis and folate protection would be most critical. In far northern regions, vitamin D synthesis would become overwhelmingly important, except where cultural adaptations like vitamin D-rich diets modified this selective pressure, explaining the anomalous case of Arctic populations. The evidence for this integrated model comes from multiple disciplines. Genetic studies confirm that different populations evolved lighter skin through different genetic pathways, suggesting independent adaptations to similar selective pressures. Nutritional research demonstrates the genuine biological challenges posed by vitamin D deficiency and folate degradation, confirming these nutrients could indeed exert powerful selective pressure on early human populations. Archaeological evidence of clothing, shelter, and diet provides context for how cultural innovations interacted with biological adaptation, sometimes reducing selective pressures and other times creating new ones. Perhaps most convincingly, computer models simulating natural selection under these combined pressures generate predicted skin color distributions that closely match observed patterns of indigenous pigmentation worldwide. This integrated approach explains anomalies that single-factor theories cannot. The relatively recent timing of European skin lightening makes sense when we consider the compounding effects of agricultural diets low in vitamin D and high in folate. Similarly, the moderate pigmentation of Arctic peoples aligns with an understanding that cultural adaptations like vitamin D-rich diets can modify selective pressures on biological traits. Cultural and biological evolution interact rather than operate independently. The genetic complexity of skin pigmentation, with hundreds of associated genetic variants, further supports this multifactorial explanation. Different genes likely responded to different selective pressures, creating the complex mosaic of human skin color we see today. This integrated understanding represents the current scientific consensus, though debate continues about the relative importance of each factor across different populations and time periods. The evolution of human skin color remains an active area of research. What emerges from this evidence is a picture of remarkable complexity. Human skin pigmentation as a sophisticated adaptive system responding to multiple environmental challenges simultaneously, shaped by both biological evolution and cultural innovation. Chapter 9. The genetic revolution. Recent advances in genomic science have transformed our understanding of human skin color evolution. Where researchers once identified a handful of major genes influencing pigmentation, we now recognize hundreds of genetic variants contributing to this complex trait. This genetic complexity reflects the biological importance of skin pigmentation. Natural selection appears to have fine-tuned this trait through multiple genetic pathways, allowing precise adaptation to specific environmental conditions across different populations. Perhaps the most surprising discovery involves the antiquity and African origins of many light skin variants. Genes associated with lighter skin in Europeans didn't all emerge after migration out of Africa. Some originated within Africa tens of thousands of years earlier. For instance, variants of the gene SLC24A5, strongly associated with lighter skin in Europeans, have been found at low frequencies in East African populations. This suggests that the genetic potential for varied skin pigmentation existed within Africa before human dispersal. This discovery challenges the simple narrative of dark-skinned humans leaving Africa and subsequently evolving lighter skin. Instead, it suggests that early humans in Africa already carried considerable genetic variation in pigmentation potential. Genetic studies of ancient DNA have provided another revolutionary insight. The timing of skin lightening in Europe appears surprisingly recent. Analysis suggests that European hunter-gatherers as recently as 8,000 years ago may have had substantially darker skin than modern Europeans. This evidence comes partly from analysis of the Western hunter-gatherer genetic profile, represented by specimens like the 8,000-year-old Cheddar Man from Britain, whose genetic markers suggest relatively dark skin combined with blue eyes. If accurate, this finding dramatically compresses the timeline for European skin lightening. Rather than occurring gradually over tens of thousands of years following migration into Europe, the most significant changes may have happened within the last 8,000 years. This accelerated timeline coincides with two major cultural transitions: the spread of agriculture into Europe and the migration of Neolithic farmers from the Near East, who carried some genetic variants associated with lighter skin. The agricultural connection is particularly intriguing. Farming populations consumed less vitamin D-rich foods like fish and game meat compared to hunter-gatherers. This dietary shift may have intensified selection for endogenous vitamin D synthesis through lighter skin. DNA analysis from diverse ancient European specimens suggests a complex population history. Rather than simple replacement, the genetic evidence indicates admixture between indigenous European hunter-gatherers, incoming Near Eastern farmers, and later steppe pastoralists. This population mixing created new combinations of pigmentation genes. The distinctive combination of pigmentation traits in modern Europeans, including various hair and eye colors alongside light skin, likely emerged from this genetic confluence. East Asian populations present another genetic puzzle. Studies show that East Asians evolved lighter skin primarily through different genetic pathways than Europeans, with the gene OC2 playing a particularly important role. This represents classic convergent evolution, different populations independently developing similar traits through different genetic mechanisms in response to similar environmental pressures. It strongly supports the environmental adaptation hypothesis. The timeline for skin lightening in East Asia remains less clear than for Europe, partly due to fewer ancient DNA samples. However, evidence suggests that, like in Europe, significant pigmentation changes occurred within the last 10,000 years. Beyond the major continental populations, genetic studies have revealed fascinating pigmentation adaptations in other groups. Melanesian populations in the Southwest Pacific, for instance, have relatively dark skin through different genetic mechanisms than African populations. Indigenous populations in the Americas show less extreme skin color variation from north to south than Old World populations. This likely reflects both their more recent migration history and the different environmental conditions of the Americas. High-altitude populations present another interesting case. Genetic studies of Tibetan and Andean peoples reveal adaptations for oxygen utilization at high elevations, but their pigmentation seems more influenced by ancestry than altitude-specific selection. The most significant recent discovery involves the sheer number of genes influencing skin color. A 2017 study analyzing pigmentation in African populations identified over 150 previously unknown genetic variants associated with skin color. This genetic complexity explains why skin color doesn't follow simple inheritance patterns. Children often have pigmentation intermediate between their parents rather than clearly favoring one parent, reflecting the polygenic nature of this trait. The genomic revolution has also revealed that many pigmentation genes serve multiple functions beyond skin color. Many influence neurological development, immune function, and other critical biological systems, explaining why certain pigmentation disorders often accompany other health conditions. This pleiotropy, genes affecting multiple traits simultaneously, complicates the evolutionary story. Selection on pigmentation genes might reflect pressures on these other functions rather than skin color alone, creating complex evolutionary trade-offs. Perhaps most significantly, genomic studies have demonstrated that visible traits like skin color represent a tiny fraction of total human genetic variation. Two individuals with identical skin pigmentation but from different populations often have more genetic differences than two differently pigmented individuals from the same population. This finding definitively refutes the biological basis of traditional racial categories. The visible traits historically used to define races represent superficial adaptations that don't align with the underlying genetic structure of human populations. Instead, genetic studies reveal that human genetic diversity is distributed in gradients across geographic space, with the greatest diversity found within Africa. These patterns reflect our species' origin in Africa and subsequent migrations across the globe. The most profound insight from modern genomics is the recognition that all humans belong to a remarkably homogeneous species. Compared to other primates like chimpanzees, humans show strikingly little genetic diversity despite our global distribution. This genetic homogeneity reflects our recent common origin and the population bottlenecks our ancestors experienced. All humans living today appear to descend from a relatively small African population that lived just 200,000 years ago. Yet within this genetic unity, local adaptations to specific environments have produced the remarkable diversity we observe in human populations worldwide. Skin pigmentation represents just one of many such adaptations, albeit one of the most visible. Recent research has uncovered an intriguing paradox. While skin color correlates with latitude at a global level, this correlation weakens when examining finer-scale pigmentation variation, especially within Africa. This suggests multiple selective pressures beyond simple UV gradients. Studies of African populations reveal far more pigmentation diversity than previously recognized. Even within relatively small geographic regions, significant variation exists, challenging simplistic narratives about uniform dark pigmentation in Africa. The San peoples of southern Africa, for instance, often have lighter skin than neighboring Bantu populations despite living at similar latitudes. This variation likely reflects different ancestral adaptations to specific environmental conditions beyond simple UV exposure. Another paradox involves the complex relationship between pigmentation genes and other adaptive traits. Some genetic variants that lighten skin appear to have been selected for other advantages, with pigmentation changes occurring as side effects. For example, a variant of the EDAR gene common in East Asian populations affects hair thickness, tooth development, and sweat gland density, potentially providing advantages in cold, dry environments, while also influencing skin properties. These pleiotropic effects create fascinating evolutionary trade-offs. Selection might favor a gene variant for one advantage despite potentially disadvantageous effects on other traits, complicating simple adaptive narratives. Perhaps the most significant recent discovery is the identification of convergent genes, genetic variants that produce similar physical outcomes but emerged independently in different populations. This provides powerful evidence for environmental adaptation rather than shared ancestry. Chapter 10. The tapestry of human adaptation. As we've journeyed through the evidence, contradictions, and newest discoveries about human skin color evolution, we arrive at a profound revelation: the story of how humans became white, or indeed, how humans developed any skin color, is far more complex and fascinating than previously understood. The big reveal is this: human skin pigmentation represents one of the clearest examples of environmental adaptation in our species. Yet paradoxically, it's also one of our most misunderstood traits, simplified, mythologized, and misappropriated throughout human history. The scientific evidence points to a remarkable conclusion. Human skin color evolved primarily as a compromise between two competing biological needs, producing enough vitamin D in low UV environments while protecting folate and other sensitive biomolecules in high UV regions. This balancing act played out differently across populations, influenced by local UV conditions, dietary patterns, cultural practices, and random genetic variations. The result is not discrete color categories, but a complex gradient of pigmentation across geographic space. What makes this evolutionary story particularly powerful is its recency and rapidity. The divergence in skin pigmentation among human populations occurred within the last 50,000 years, an evolutionary eye blink, demonstrating how quickly natural selection can act when selective pressures are strong. The genomic evidence reveals an even more surprising truth. Many of the genetic variants associated with lighter skin originated in Africa long before human migration out of the continent. The potential for varied pigmentation was present from the beginning of our species. This means that rather than evolving whiteness as something entirely new, migrating human populations experienced selection that altered the frequency of already existing genetic variants, favoring those that produced lighter skin in specific environmental contexts. Perhaps most revelatory is the evidence that significant skin lightening in Europeans occurred remarkably recently, within the last 8,000 years, coinciding with the spread of agriculture. This timeline challenges the simple narrative of immediate adaptation following migration into northern regions. This agricultural connection reveals a profound truth about human evolution. Cultural innovations often create new selective pressures on our biology. The shift to farming likely reduced dietary vitamin D while increasing time spent outdoors, intensifying selection for endogenous vitamin D synthesis. Similarly, the discovery that East Asians evolved lighter skin through different genetic pathways than Europeans demonstrates convergent evolution, different populations independently developing similar adaptations to similar environmental challenges. This convergent evolution powerfully refutes notions of separate racial lineages. Instead, it shows how natural selection can produce similar outcomes through different genetic routes when populations face similar environmental pressures. The modern science of pigmentation genetics has revealed that skin color is controlled by hundreds of genetic variants, many with small individual effects. This complex genetic architecture explains the continuous nature of skin color variation across populations. This genetic complexity also explains why skin color doesn't align with other aspects of human variation. Many genetic variants affecting skin color don't influence other traits, creating discordant patterns that fail to support traditional racial classifications. The most significant revelation may be how thoroughly modern genetics has dismantled the biological concept of race. The visible traits historically used to define racial categories represent recent, superficial adaptations that don't reflect the underlying genetic structure of human populations. Instead, genetic studies reveal that all humans today share a recent common ancestry in Africa, with subsequent migrations, adaptations, and intermixing creating the patterns of diversity we see today. We are one young, remarkably homogeneous species. The story of skin color evolution offers a powerful corrective to historical misconceptions. Skin color differences don't reflect separate evolutionary paths or inherent biological hierarchies, but rather ingenious adaptations to specific environmental conditions. This understanding fundamentally reframes human diversity. Our differences represent not division, but adaptation. The remarkable ability of our species to adjust to diverse environments through both biological evolution and cultural innovation. The integrated model of skin pigmentation evolution, incorporating vitamin D synthesis, folate protection, and other selective pressures, explains both the general latitudinal pattern of skin color and the exceptions that challenge simpler explanations. For instance, the relatively dark skin of Arctic peoples makes sense when we consider their traditional diet rich in vitamin D from marine sources. Cultural adaptation reduced selective pressure for biological change, demonstrating the interplay between culture and biology. Similarly, the accelerated timeline of European skin lightening aligns with evidence that agricultural diets reduced natural vitamin D sources while potentially increasing folate intake through green vegetables, shifting the optimal balance point for skin pigmentation. The revelation that cultural practices profoundly influence biological evolution offers a new perspective on human adaptation. Unlike other species, humans modify our environment through culture, creating new selective pressures that then shape our biology. This cultural biological feedback loop represents humanity's most distinctive adaptive strategy. Rather than waiting for biological evolution to adapt to new environments, our ancestors used cultural innovation to survive while biological adaptation caught up over generations. The study of ancient DNA has revealed another surprising truth. The combination of physical traits we associate with different populations today often emerged quite recently. The distinctive European combination of light skin, varied eye colors, and diverse hair colors may be less than 5,000 years old. This recent emergence of familiar physical traits reminds us that human appearance continues to evolve. The selective pressures shaping our biology haven't stopped. They've merely changed with our changing environments and cultural practices. Modern genomic studies have uncovered what might be the most significant revelation. The genes controlling skin color influence multiple biological systems beyond pigmentation. Many affect neurological development, immune function, and other critical processes. This pleiotropy, genes affecting multiple traits simultaneously, explains why certain pigmentation disorders often accompany other health conditions. It also suggests that selection on these genes might reflect pressures beyond skin color alone. The discovery that pigmentation genes serve multiple functions helps explain another paradox: why some genetic variants persist despite seemingly disadvantageous effects on skin color in certain environments. Their benefits for other biological systems may outweigh pigmentation disadvantages. Perhaps most profound is the revelation that human biological variation represents a success story rather than a problem to overcome. Our diversity reflects our species' remarkable adaptability, the ability to thrive in environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest. This adaptability stems from both genetic flexibility and cultural innovation. Where biological adaptation would take too long, cultural solutions bridge the gap, whether through specialized clothing, dietary practices, shelter design, or technological innovations. The evidence reveals that human skin pigmentation represents an elegant compromise, optimized for specific environmental conditions through natural selection. Each population's skin color reflects an evolutionary balance point between competing biological needs. What emerges from this investigation is a profound truth. Human diversity represents adaptation rather than division. The visible differences between human populations tell a story not of separation, but of ingenious adaptation to diverse environments. As we conclude our exploration of how humans develop different skin colors, we're left with a perspective that transforms how we understand human variation. What began as a simple question about pigmentation has led us to profound insights about human adaptation and unity. The scientific evidence tells us that skin color evolved primarily as an environmental adaptation, a sophisticated biological response to the challenges of ultraviolet radiation in different geographic regions. This adaptation occurred remarkably recently in our evolutionary history. Yet this biological story intertwines with human cultural evolution. Our ancestors used clothing, shelter, diet, and technology to survive in new environments, modifying the very selective pressures acting on their biology. Culture and biology evolved together in complex feedback loops. This interplay between biological adaptation and cultural innovation continues today. Modern humans use sunscreen, vitamin supplements, clothing, and architecture to manage our relationship with sunlight, cultural solutions to evolutionary challenges. Perhaps the most significant insight is how thoroughly this evidence refutes historical misconceptions about human variation. Skin color differences don't reflect separate evolutionary lineages or inherent hierarchies, but rather adaptive responses to specific environmental conditions. The continuous gradient of human skin pigmentation across geographic space aligns not with discrete racial categories, but with environmental variables, primarily UV radiation levels, modified by cultural practices and random historical factors. This understanding transforms how we conceptualize human diversity. Our differences represent successful adaptation to diverse environments through both biological and cultural means, a testament to our species' remarkable flexibility rather than evidence of division. As we navigate our increasingly interconnected world, this evolutionary perspective offers valuable insights. Human populations continue to migrate and mix, creating new genetic combinations and reducing the geographic isolation that drove many local adaptations. The story of skin color evolution reminds us that we are one remarkably adaptable species, united by our common African origin and our shared capacity for both biological and cultural adaptation. Our surface differences reflect our environmental history, not our biological potential. Looking to the future, will you join us in exploring more of humanity's evolutionary mysteries? Subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the science behind human origins, adaptation, and diversity, where we separate evidence from myth and reveal the remarkable story of what makes us human.